Hey guys, it's Peter here, and today I'd like to cover a little bit about my workflow. So basically, so far you've kind of seen this desktop, as in the Houdini desktop, that has, just the default build desktop, but that's not actually how I tend to work. Most of the time, I tend to split my desktop up in different panels. So I thought I'd show you how to configure your desktop as well if you want to, become a little more productive, and also the reason why I split up my desktop the way I do it. So I've got this this file up over here, which was the leftover from the SDF videos. And if you haven't seen that, definitely recommend, go check that out. It's a cool little tutorial to show you how to, have objects crawl over another object. So my particles are crawling over my SDF over here. Now, the point that I want to go into is not so much this effect right now, but just sort of the way that I lay out my scene. So normally when I'm working, then I will split up my desktop. So in order to do that, you can kind of already see I have a tech dev desktop that I've saved from a previous session when I'm actually deving stuff. Now let's do a new one. So if I say save the current desktop as, right, I'll call this one temporarily tech dev 2, just so that we have something to go into and modify. So it's going to be saved over here to blah blah blah, wherever. And so by default, we can now configure this a little bit differently. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split this left and right. So here, split this left and right. So we have new panels, right? And I'm going to split this top and bottom as well. So here, split top and bottom. And so now, okay, we got a lot of viewports. I don't need all these viewports. These are going to be turned into parameter views, into network views. So here's a network view, here's another network view, and I'm going to split this one also top and bottom. So here, let's split this one top and bottom. And I'm going to change this bottom one over here into a textport, because I find textports are quite useful to do expressions and things like that. I can say exhelp and then, for instance, the channel expression, and it'll give you a bunch of information about the channel expression. Now, all right, that's about all that I need for the textport right now. We'll see later on, I can add other panes here as well. Now, let's go into these guys, right, and configure them a little bit more. So one of the things that I want to do is notice that you can link these panes differently. So this will be pane number 1, this will be pane number 2, and then this one over here, this could be, for instance, a completely different pane, could be like an output pane, right? And I'm going to stick this, I'm going to pin this so that it's stuck together. Next, we're going to give ourselves a little bit more space over here so we can just see the viewport. And then other things that I like to do is, in terms of organization, you can go to tools and you can say show grid, right, and turn on grid points. I don't particularly grid lines, it's a little bit much, it's a little bit too much for me, I don't like that, but I do like the little grid points because my nodes can basically snap to these points, and it's a nice way to work cleanly, right, so that if I've got a lot of nodes, I can snap them. So we'll do that for everything. So here, tools, grid points, same thing here, tools, grid points. And so that allows me to fairly cleanly work as I'm going, right, so that I don't necessarily create like huge messy networks, because it's easy to do that, and I'm definitely guilty of doing that too. Okay, so next, why would you want to even work like this, right? Because aren't you losing like a lot of screen real estate? Well, yeah, to some extent you are a bit, but on the other hand, you can be in multiple contexts at the same time. So notice what's going to happen. For instance, if I leave my visualization of my surface here on this viz surface crawl, but at the same time I can dive inside of my popnet, inside of my subsolver, and then maybe even inside of my attribute VOP, and we can start making some modifications here, while at the same time, right, we can leave our desktop now, link it to number 2. So I can make some changes here and snap and whatever, and play this back, right, as it goes. Now we're inside of a subsolver here, so we got to be a little careful when we modify things. So it's a good idea to reset our simulation as we work. So this is where I can create another panel over here, and this will become a parameters view panel. And this will need to point to the top level of my .NET. So here, my top level .NET, where I have my reset simulation button, I'm going to pin that and just stick it there. So in the meantime, I'm going to temporarily move myself to this side of the screen, so you can ignore that, so you can see what is going on here. All right, so what is going on here is that the only thing I want here is that reset simulation button, so that I can be inside of my PopNet doing, you know, whatever I need to do, right? And very quickly reset the simulation. I'm still watching, right? Link is set to 2. The link is set to 2. The parameters view over here, this is linked to whatever I've got selected. So whether it is my trail or whether it's my subsolver or whether I can be inside here, right? Can play this back, right? It's simulating right now, so it's simming. It's sticking to the surface. If I want to quickly turn off my subsolver, you know, play this back again, right? We can basically see the result, right? So it's quickly to affect things. And so this is a really nice way of working for me personally, because I can, you know, be multiple levels down, right? And I can be inside of my PopNet, enable, disable my subsolver, make modifications at the VOP level. So I'm really in multiple levels at the same time. So rather than having to go up, whatever, you know, this to me is much faster. And I know you can set shortcuts if you wanted to and jump, you know, with Control and Alt 1 and so on, but I prefer working this way. This is generally, to me, this is a really fast way of working, right? And so as we step out of it, our visualization is set to currently version 2. If we don't want that, we can disable this, no link, right? And just or unpin it altogether. And now it is going to visualize wherever we are. But this is a little bit risky, because if you are inside of your subsolver, well, there is no guarantee that you know, your system is basically just simming on the fly, right? It's like why is it not working right now? Well, because the visualization is inside of the subsolver. I am in my PopNet, in my subsolver snap, and so inside of this subsolver, right, there's no guarantee that it actually is updating properly. So you got to make sure that you're either stepping outside of your subsolver, and then make sure that you rewind your network, and then you can play it back, and now it's actually solving properly. The other thing that we can do just to force it is to reset that simulation setting. So reset the simulation will definitely help with that. So I like, basically, if I'm doing this kind of stuff, I like deving in my first one, and then often I will set my visualization to my second one. So that way we can just make sure that whatever I'm doing, I'm always, you know, able to quickly reset my system, as well as modify any of my interior detail, my forces, my winds, whatever, my custom subsolvers, that kind of stuff. So that's quite a nice way to work it. So that's one way to quickly see stuff. Other things that are quite useful as well, if you're inside of somebody's network and you're basically just, it might be mine, might be somebody else's, is you can quickly sort of turn on the dependencies. So let me see, under view, you can say dependency links. So if we say show for all nodes, right, notice that there's some other lines that started appearing, right? So here, this kind of, you know, little orangey line. What is that, right? That basically means that there's a relationship between these nodes. Now in our case, it was I was linking here the bounds of my VDB exterior banding to my displacement parameter. So if we look over here, this was, if we look at this briefly, right, this was my VDB sphere. We're doing displacement on it, and we're doing yet another displacement on it. So pretty simple operation, but that meant that over here, if we displace by a value of 0.5 and potentially a value of 0.2, that we at least want to make sure that our bands of our VDB is at least 0.7, maybe even a little bit more. Therefore, I had some kind of other operation there. Now, these lines, these red lines, right, they basically represent over here the dependencies. So that means that there is a dependency going from this volume VOP to this other node. And that's particularly useful to display at least once here, because after a while it can get tedious. You can hide them again, right? But it's nice to display them initially when you start on a new HIP file from somebody else or from yourself that you may have done 3 or 4 months ago and you've forgotten how you've built all this stuff. Because this basically shows you, you know, where, you know, all these channel references and what they're doing, right? Where they're pulling from, which node is dependent on what node, right? So I guess there's a dependency somehow over here as well, because I might be referencing it on the inside. I'm not 100% sure where that's coming from. It might be also the up input path expression over here that is actually using, right? This could be qualified as, you know, a dependency as well. So different things, like if we were to do an object merge, right? Actually, I have some object merges here. We can kind of see, right, the ref polygons, the ref SDF, all of this gets plugged in. So on the inside of my subsolver, here's my nodes that are pulling those dependencies, right? So here my polygons are being pulled in, my SDFs are being pulled in. So again, these are dependencies that are coming in as well. So that's quite useful. Then lastly, you saw me sort of modify some of the display settings, right? So here, if you press D over the viewport, right, you can go to geometry, right? And then say, you know, for instance, show me as sprites, show it as points, show it as pixels if we want it to be. If we had massive amounts of particles, right? If we just crank up this scatter node for just a moment and I don't know, set it to 1,000,000, now we're going to have a lot more particles. Now we'll still sim pretty quickly, simply because we're doing that SDF sampling on the inside. So there it goes, 100. So now we can basically see it as pixels. So this is about as fine detailed as it gets in the viewport. If you wanted to say, no, don't show it to me as pixels, show it to me as points, right? It's a bit bigger. And then you can still control over here the point size, right? So if we were to say, you know, for educational purposes only, right, we would see something like 8 points, right? So it gets really fat, but you know, that way you can kind of see them in the viewport and, you know, explain things a little bit easier or things like that, or see them if you want to visualize them. Cool. So that's quite useful in terms of you know, all of these kind of, you know, visualization settings. Other things that are nice to sort of briefly visualize, I mentioned this already in terms of polygons, is I like turning my hulls on. So here, this you know, shows me the active region of my voxels, right? So because otherwise you're just looking at the bounds of the volume of the voxels, but it's not that useful. If you turn on the hulls over here, you can actually see the active bands and the active region. So if we were to increase that to something like 20 or so, you'll see this expands, right? So this is basically the active region is much higher now. All right, so those are some, hopefully some, you know, small useful things, the way that I sort of lay out my you know, my settings. Another thing to kind of just be careful of is if you've got spreadsheets active, let's say, you know, inside of your PopNet, you make a spreadsheet, or we can even do here a spreadsheet, right? And visualize all of these attributes here, show all these attributes. Now, if we were to reset the simulation and let this run, and actually we know that all of this is basically also being displayed here. Notice how many points we have. We have 1,000,000 points, right? With, I don't know how many records we've got. A lot of these, you know, these are, you know, sort of information, data, attributes, and all that. So that means as these particles are updating, these records are starting to update too. Now, simply displaying this geometry spreadsheet can slow down your system, simply because there's so much data that needs to be updated. So be careful if you have heavy particle simulations and you have a geometry spreadsheet visible, because it will basically it'll force this to cook. Let's say this was sort of, you know, off screen and I kind of ignored it. I was kind of like, well, I don't really care about it so much, you know, and I'm like looking at different things. I might even be inspecting my SDF. And if I try to play this back, right, or even reset, right, notice it needs to cook right now. See, it is actually simulating. It's not playing back, even though my display flag is here, because my geometry spreadsheet is still active, right? Even though my display is there, right? This is all updating and cooking and simming. So be careful with having spreadsheets open, because they can kind of slow down your system if you're not careful, right? And then lastly, notice as well, just over here, this SDF right now it'll play back really quick. It's not simming anymore because we're not dealing with any animated geometry. This is currently static geometry. If we look here, we can kind of see the little time clock. That means this node is time dependent. Same thing here. It'll update over time, right? So that basically means, you know, obviously a simulation depends on the previous frame. And so it's going to get time dependent, right? Yeah, so that's basically some of the things that I wanted to cover, and you know, how I like working. Occasionally I will create a new floating panel, so let's say something along these lines, if we're gonna go and do some rendering. So they've changed this around a little bit on me, so I don't know where my render parameters are anymore. Legacy rendering, I suppose, is here, render view. So if I wanted to render some ROP that I might have created, let's say, you know, there's a mantra ROP here, and now it's legacy. I'm gonna have to learn the new LOPS context as well, all the new Solaris stuff. But this is basically whether it's a mantra node or an Arnold node or some other kind of, you know, rendering renderman or something else. Basically, this is also something that I will do just to sort of, you know, quickly be able to check this out. Now, I don't tend to use the render view in here that much because you know, I want to be able to see what my viewport is doing. Instead, I tend to just branch this off and either put this on another color corrected monitor. You know, oftentimes I will have or be working with multiple monitors, 2 monitors, 3 monitors, whatever. Yeah, But that's sort of what I intend to do as well. So a new floating panel allows you to bring in, any kind of additional panel so that you can shove that onto your second monitor. You can shove that into a new viewport as well, scene view. Yeah, so those are kind of useful operations. Hope you enjoyed this. If you did, this little utility video is more kind of a workflow for me. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you. Bye.